Right, diving right in.
Yeah, so jumping straight into the feedback here, a compelling architectural vision requires an equally robust operational governance model to survive contact with reality.
Absolutely. I mean, the material brilliantly establishes the architectural necessity of a clean core, but right now it kind of skips over the messy reality of how an organization actually enforces this discipline, you know? Like when the human element of the business inevitably demands a custom workaround.
Which they always do. Oh, guaranteed. And the texts do a thorough job acknowledging that the pressure to customize comes from a legitimate place, right? They point out that standard out-of-the-box ERPs don't perfectly cover, say, country-specific tax laws.
Sure, or highly unique industry processes.
Exactly. The nuance there is strong. But the weakness is that the material treats the solution purely as an architectural rerouting. It suggests simply taking that custom logic and, well, just moving it to external layers.
Like a data orchestration layer?
Right, or a specialized compliance platform. It basically assumes that if you just draw a box on a system architecture diagram labeled External Compliance Platform, the problem is instantly solved.
Yeah, and by framing it purely as a technical maneuver, the texts largely ignore the intense human, political, and organizational friction involved.
So much friction. I mean, it is one thing to architect an external layer. It is entirely another thing to look a 20-year veteran of the finance department in the eye and say, no, you cannot have that custom field in the main ledger. We are changing how you work.
Oh, yeah. Senior business stakeholders are used to dictating system requirements, right? They are definitely not used to being told the core system is locked.
Exactly.
I hear that, but let me push back a bit on the execution here, just to deepen the analysis.
Okay, sure.
If we start injecting heavy organizational governance frameworks into this text, committees, approval gates, change management philosophy, does it risk diluting the hard-hitting technical manifesto vibe the author has built?
How do you mean?
Well, to use an analogy, the vision being sold here is like a beautiful, pristine highway, right? It's all about the open road, speed, efficiency. If we spend too much time talking about setting up the toll booths and the weigh stations to keep the overloaded trucks off, we might lose the excitement of the highway itself.
I see where you're coming from. But without those weigh stations, your pristine highway gets destroyed in 6 months by overloaded trucks.
Yeah, fair point.
The same principle applies to a clean core. The technical manifesto is vital, but the suggestion for improvement here is to explicitly address the organizational change management and governance mechanisms required to actually defend that core.
Right, shifting the focus from purely technical architecture to a socio-technical discipline.
Exactly. Because if a VP demands a custom table to handle a bespoke reporting requirement, the enterprise architect needs more than just a slick technical diagram to say no. They need a governance mandate.
So how do we bridge that gap without, writing a textbook on corporate governance?
We need to give the reader a tactical tool.
Like what?
Well, the author could introduce a simple core versus edge decision matrix.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it acts as a practical framework that executives can use to evaluate stakeholder requests when they inevitably arise. And it doesn't need to be overly complex. You just outline the specific criteria.
Like asking, does this custom request create genuine competitive differentiation in the market, or is it just a local reporting quirk?
Spot on. If it's a reporting quirk, it automatically gets pushed to the edge. If it's proprietary intellectual property, well, maybe it warrants a different conversation.
That definitely gives the technical reader a weapon to take into boardroom battles.
Right. Alternatively, instead of a matrix, the author could include a brief vignette.
A story-driven approach.
Yeah, show a CIO successfully negotiating with a finance team. Paint the scene where the CIO explains the long-term cost of technical debt and actually convinces them to move their bespoke reporting logic into the data orchestration layer rather than embedding it as a custom table.
A vignette grounds the conflict beautifully. It proves to the listener, or the reader rather, that the author understands not just how the technology works, but how the political machinery of the business operates.
For sure. And to be clear to the listener as they revise, these are just a few possible ways to illustrate governance, right? You don't have to use a matrix or a CIO story.
Right. Any framework that tackles the how to say no aspect will work perfectly.
Exactly. Anything that shows how the business practically enforces the discipline day to day will strengthen this section immensely.
Okay, so moving on. Once you win that political battle and secure the core using those governance tools, the system's standardized output is finally ready to power next-generation tools. Which brings us to the next point. Abstract technological concepts resonate most powerfully when anchored to a mundane, everyday business process.
Yes, absolutely. The discussion in the text regarding the Internet of Agents and autonomous AI systems relying on standard data is, well, it's intellectually sound. The author builds a very logical case.
But
But the weakness is that it remains highly theoretical. It talks about AI operating at scale, functioning at machine speed, the necessity of clean data feeds, all good stuff. But it lacks a tangible, grounded demonstration of how this actually plays out differently than the status quo on the factory floor or in the back office.
Right. So as I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that AI will fail silently on bad data. Is the connection between the standardized ERP data and the AI agent fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster with the day-in-the-life scenario?
It definitely needs bolstering. The text just states the silent failure as a fact without explaining the mechanics.
Because an AI agent lacks human intuition.
Exactly. If an ERP feeds it a customized, non-standard tax code field, say, a field a developer hijacked 10 years ago to store regional routing numbers, the AI agent doesn't flag a formatting error.
Right. It just confidently hallucinates a wrong reconciliation and posts it to the ledger at machine speed.
Yes, and that is the compounding cost of a dirty core. But right now, the connection between the standardized ERP data and the AI agent feels really unmoored.
So the suggestion here is to ground these overarching claims about AI and machine speed agents by contrasting a specific, universally understood transaction under both the old, dirty core legacy model and the new clean core paradigm.
Exactly. Take the abstract concept of silent AI failure or brittle architecture and show it happening in a process that every single reader recognizes.
Let's walk through what that looks like practically. If I'm editing this, I'd want to contrast, say, an order-to-cash process.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah, so in the legacy model, you describe a scenario where a custom tax configuration, let's call it a massive 15-year-old Z program embedded deep in the ERP, suddenly breaks during a routine mandatory software upgrade.
And you have to paint the fallout of that break. The process halts. Thousands of invoices are just stuck in a queue.
Right. A human accountant has to manually dig through the system logs, realize the custom code is no longer compatible with the new ERP version, run a root cause analysis, and write a temporary patch just to get cash flowing again.
It takes 3 days, and the business bleeds money the entire time. That is the reality of the dirty core that executives live with every single quarter.
And then we pivot to the clean core paradigm using the exact same order-to-cash transaction.
Right. So in the clean core model, the standard ERP generates a pristine data payload. The external data orchestration layer instantly applies the complex regional tax rules via standard APIs.
And because the data is perfectly standardized and reliable, an AI agent auto-reconciles the payment at machine speed without a single moment of human delay.
The contrast there is just stark. The reader sees the theoretical compounding cost of customization translated into a blocked invoice and a panicked accounting team.
And then they see the Internet of Agents translated into frictionless, automated cash flow.
It forces the executive reader to think, wow, I have 50 people doing that manual reconciliation right now, and every time we upgrade our system, things break. That is the light bulb moment you want to engineer.
Oh, for sure. And emphasize that an order-to-cash example is just one option out of many. A supply chain scenario involving vendor onboarding, or maybe a procurement scenario dealing with anomalous purchase orders would be equally effective.
Yeah, the specific process matters less than the act of dragging the high-minded AI theory down into the trenches of daily business operations. When you anchor the capability to the mundane, the technology suddenly feels inevitable rather than speculative.
Absolutely. Okay, so having grounded the theoretical concepts into practical, everyday examples, we must now look at how these enhanced messages are distributed across the entirety of the submitted portfolio.
Right, looking at the big picture of the campaign.
Exactly. Multiple pieces of content within a single campaign serve the reader best when they offer distinct complementary value rather than overlapping arguments.
Yeah, and we have 2 separate documents here, right? An article and a blog post. Individually, Both pieces of content are well crafted, but when you view them as a package intended for a single campaign, a structural weakness emerges.
They overlap too much.
Way too much. The article and the blog post share almost identical thematic beats. They employ the exact same metaphors regarding mortgages on future capability versus compounding costs, and they mirror each other's structures regarding external layers.
This creates redundancy rather than guiding the reader through a sequenced educational journey. It's like, let me use a boxing analogy here.
Go for it.
Compare the current dual document approach to a 1-2 punch in boxing. Right now, the material is throwing two identical jabs.
Right.
A jab sets the distance, it establishes rhythm, but if you just keep throwing the exact same jab over and over, your opponent or your reader predicts it. They stop reacting. To be truly effective, it needs a jab, the article, to set up the vision, followed by a powerful cross, the blog post, to deliver the practical execution.
That is a great way to put it. Because if a chief information officer clicks on the article, gets fired up about the financial benefits of a clean core, and then clicks on the blog post expecting to learn the next step, they're going to bounce off the page if they just read the same philosophical argument again.
You lose their attention and you lose the conversion.
Exactly. So the suggestion here is to sharply differentiate the specific intent, the target audience, and the scope of each piece, so they act as a unified funnel. One piece sets the strategic hook, and the other delivers the tactical blueprint.
Okay, so let's flesh that out with some concrete examples. If the author were to reposition the article, they could make it the executive why.
Yes, focusing exclusively on the compounding financial costs of technical debt, upgrade constraints, and AI readiness to secure C-suite buy-in.
Keep that brilliant mortgage on future capability metaphor in the article because that is where it packs the most punch for a financial decision maker.
Right. You want the CEO reading this and realizing their heavily customized ERP is a strategic liability. You want them forwarding it to their chief enterprise architect with a note saying, "We need to fix this."
Which leads us directly to the blog post. The architect clicks the link, so we need to pivot that second piece to be the architect's how.
Right, stripping out the high-level persuasion because the article already did that job. The blog post must focus purely on the practical path of progressive externalization.
For example, the author could outline the first 3 types of customizations a company should move to their data orchestration layer today.
Dive into the mechanics. Discuss how to map legacy Z programs to standard APIs.
Talk about the data translation required to ensure the external compliance platform can communicate back to the core without corrupting the standard tables.
Exactly. Give them a step-by-step methodology for unwinding technical debt. This creates a brilliant, unified journey for the reader. The executive is convinced by the strategy, and the architect is equipped with the tactics.
And we should remind the listener that these specific angles are just one way to separate the content.
Oh, for sure.
You don't have to use this exact executive versus architect split. You might choose to make the article a generalized industry overview and the blog post hyper-focus on manufacturing supply chains.
Or one focused strictly on navigating regulatory compliance and the other on training AI models. The specific division matters less than the fact that a sharp division actually exists, provided the pieces ultimately serve distinct functions.
Right. If you are asking a reader to invest their attention across multiple assets, you owe them net new value with every single click.
Absolutely.
Well, let's briefly summarize the core themes of the critique today. We looked at the underlying strength of the material's architectural argument, and then the absolute necessity of introducing human governance frameworks to protect it.
Right. And the importance of grounding abstract AI concepts with concrete process vignettes.
And finally, the strategic need to differentiate the multiple pieces of content so they don't overlap.
So, as an actionable summary for the listener, implement a core versus edge matrix or a CIO negotiation vignette to handle the human governance.
Insert a comparative transaction scenario, like the order-to-cash example, to show AI in action.
And divide the campaign clearly into an executive why and an architect's how, or a similar split, to avoid redundancy.
Perfect. We warmly invite the listener to apply these actionable suggestions and submit their revised work back into the critique for further exploration. Thanks for tuning in.